You'd think moving into a quiet, suburban neighborhood meant safety, peace, and friendly waves from the people next door. That's what my wife Sarah and I believed until we crossed paths with Karen Whitfield, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. One evening, a simple guest parking issue spiraled into chaos when Karen picked up her phone and called in the cops. Within minutes, 2 uniformed men stormed onto our driveway, barking orders like drill sergeants gone wrong. But the moment one of them shoved Sarah, the air changed. My instincts, the ones I carried from years as a Navy SEAL, snapped awake. They thought they were in control, but tonight they had no idea whose door they had knocked on. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these HOA stories travel. When I first moved into Willow Creek, I thought the place was something out of a real estate brochure. Perfectly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and kids riding their bikes without a care in the world. It was the kind of place Sarah had always wanted: quiet, predictable, safe. But what no glossy brochure ever tells you is the hidden tax of suburbia, the HOA. Our HOA wasn't just a committee, it was a miniature kingdom. And at the center of that kingdom sat Karen Whitfield. Middle-aged, sharp bob haircut, permanent sunglasses perched like a crown, and the type of smile that could curdle milk. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of order in our neighborhood, and she carried her HOA bylaws like they were stone tablets handed down from the heavens. It started small, as these things usually do. A notice slipped into our mailbox because my recycling bin had been left out on a windy day. Then another about a garden gnome Sarah had set by the walkway, apparently not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. I brushed it off. I'd been through tougher situations than a passive-aggressive letter. I had dealt with men armed with AK-47 second in deserts halfway across the world. A woman with a clipboard wasn't going to rattle me. But Sarah had a streak of kindness that sometimes bordered on naivety. She wanted to reason with Karen to believe there was some humanity under that helmet of hairspray. She even baked cookies once and brought them over after Karen warned us about trimming our hedges. Karen took the cookies, thanked her with that plastic smile, and the next week slapped us with another violation notice. The turning point came during an HOA meeting in the community center. Ron Dalrymple, the HOA president, stood at the front in his suit, pretending to be neutral, while Karen handled the important matters. She raised her voice about residents failing to respect the rules, and then her eyes slid toward me like a blade. Some homeowners, she said, believe they are above the law of this community. They park where they please, decorate as they please, and refuse to contribute to our shared standards. I knew she meant me. I also knew I hadn't broken any rule that wasn't made up on the spot. When I raised my hand to respond, she tried to cut me off. That's when I decided to stop playing passive neighbor and speak up. Karen, I said, calm and steady where I come from, laws are enforced by people with authority, real authority, and they don't change week to week depending on who you dislike. You're not a sheriff and this isn't the Wild West. The room went quiet and Ron shifted uncomfortably. A few neighbors coughed into their hands. Karen's face flushed crimson, and for the first time I saw the crack in her control. From that night forward, she made me her personal project. Suddenly, Sarah's rose bushes were too close to the sidewalk. Our driveway had oil stains. Even the shade of our mailbox factory standard was allegedly off by 2 tones. I laughed it off at first, but Sarah began to worry. She hated conflict, and the thought of constant fines and hearings drained her. What Karen didn't realize was that I had been trained to spot patterns, to read people the way most folks read newspapers. And the pattern was clear. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was escalating. Each notice, each accusation was a step in her little war. Then came the day of the parking incident. Sarah's sister Emily had stopped by to drop off some baby clothes for a neighbor. She parked in the visitor spot near our home. By the time she left, her car had been there maybe 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That was enough fuel for Karen's fire. Sarah told me later how she saw Karen across the street, phone in hand, snapping photos like a paparazzo. Violation, Karen shouted across the cul-de-sac. I'm calling this in, Sarah laughed, thinking it was another empty threat. But Karen wasn't bluffing. 10 minutes later, a black SUV rolled into our neighborhood, emblazoned with a makeshift logo, HOA Security Enforcement. Out stepped 2 men, broad-shouldered, mid-32nd, with mirrored sunglasses and tactical vests that looked like they'd been ordered from a discount military surplus catalog. They carried radios, not badges. When Sarah told me about it afterward, she said her first thought was, they can't be real cops. But when one of them stomped toward her, barking, "Ma'am, you're in violation of Neighborhood Code 4.2. Step aside while we document this," the chill set in. They demanded her ID, threatened to issue fines, and insisted the car had to be moved immediately, even though it was already gone. Sarah tried to reason with them, explaining Emily had left, that there was no problem anymore. That's when one of them, a tall brute named Todd Klein, shoved past her shoulder to get a better look at our driveway. His partner Mason Cobb snickered like it was all a game. When I replay the footage later, I see Sarah's face shocked, humiliated, and angry. That was the exact moment my patience ended. But before we get there, let me explain what I noticed right away. Their SUV had no license plates. Their patches had no department seal. Their radios were tuned to nothing but static. And the way they moved sloppy, uncoordinated. These weren't cops. These were imposters. Thugs with a power complex fueled by Karen's vendetta. And if there's one thing I learned in the SEALs, it's this. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one firing bullets. It's the one pretending to have authority when he has none. That night, as Sarah sat shaken at our kitchen table, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Karen bully my wife or let her pet mercenaries play police on my street. She thought she was in control, but she had just awakened the wrong neighbor. And in my world, when the gloves come off, people learn fast who they're really dealing with. The next afternoon felt like any other suburban day. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, the hum of lawnmowers echoed down the street, and Sarah was watering her azaleas out front. Normal. Too normal. Which is usually when things go wrong. I was in the garage, tinkering with some tools, when I heard the low rumble of tires on asphalt. Not unusual delivery vans, neighbors' SUVs, but this one had a presence to it. A black vehicle, unmarked, crawling down the cul-de-sac like a shark circling prey. I stepped halfway out of the garage, wiping my hands, and watched it roll to a stop in front of our house. On the side of the SUV was a white decal that read, HOA Security Enforcement. My gut tightened. No official police department in this state or any state had such a thing. Two men got out. They weren't sloppy teenagers playing dress-up. They were mid-30s, thick arms, shaved heads, tactical vests strapped tight. Each wore mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun had ducked behind clouds. And they moved with that fake swagger, the kind that comes from watching too many action movies and mistaking yourself for the hero. The first one barked, "Ma'am, step away from the property." His voice was sharp, designed to intimidate. Sarah froze, hose still in her hand, water dribbling into the soil. "I live here," she said, confused. "What's the problem?" "Violation code 4.2, he snapped. "Unauthorized vehicle parking. Identification now." I felt my pulse kick up, but my training steadied me. Observe before acting. Always. I studied them, no badges, no name tags, not even holstered weapons. Their radios squawked static, nothing more. This wasn't law enforcement. This was theater. Sarah, bless her heart, tried reason. "My sister left already. There's no car here anymore." That's when the second man, taller, leaner, a sneer etched into his face, muttered, "Don't argue, lady." He shoved past her shoulder like he owned the place, marching toward our driveway. Sarah stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. That was the switch for me. I stepped out fully, voice low but carrying. "Hey, back away from my wife." Both turned. Sunglasses hid their eyes, but I could feel the smugness radiating. The first one squared his stance. "Sir, stay back. Official HOA business." "HOA business," I repeated, half amused, half furious. "You think that gives you jurisdiction to put hands on my wife?" The sneer deepened. "You refusing to comply." It was almost funny how they tried to mimic authority. But humor turned to ice when I noticed Sarah's arm red where she'd been shoved. My jaw tightened. I fought the instinct to close distance, to take them down fast and hard. But years of missions taught me sometimes the best weapon is patience. So instead I asked, calm as stone, "What department are you with? Which precinct dispatched you?" That tripped them. A flicker of hesitation passed across their faces, gone as quickly as it came. "Neighborhood security," the tall one answered too quickly. I almost laughed. "Neighborhood security doesn't shove women." The first one puffed out his chest. "We have authority. We'll issue a fine and escalate to the board. Unless you'd like to make things more difficult." Behind me I heard a door open, Mrs. Alvarez from across the street, phone already out recording. Smart woman. To my left, young Tyler peeked from his porch drone, hovering up into the air. The cavalry wasn't here, but eyes were. Witnesses. That would matter. I leaned casually against the garage frame, making a show of being relaxed. Inside my mind ran calculations, angles, distances, how long it would take to close the gap. If they reached for weapons, it'd be less than 2 seconds before I had them both disarmed and face first on the pavement. But I held back. Not yet. Instead, I prodded. "Funny thing, guys. Did you know impersonating federal or state law enforcement falls under 18 U.S.C. Section 912? It's a felony. Minimum prison time. They didn't like that. The tall one's jaw twitched. The other shifted weight uneasily. Sarah, regaining her composure, added sharply, "I'm calling the police. The real ones. Don't." The shorter one snapped, pointing a finger at her. The gesture was sloppy, desperate. "You'll regret it." That was their second mistake. The first was touching my wife. The second was threatening her. I pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Controlled, calm. "You're already in deep water. You just don't know how deep yet." For a moment, silence stretched across the street. Neighbors' curtains shifted. Everyone was watching. Karen's silver SUV sat parked 2 houses down, and I spotted her head duck behind the window, as if she were invisible. Of course. She'd unleashed these clowns and was too cowardly to stand in the open. Then, like amateurs who couldn't read a room, the fake cops doubled down. "We're issuing a violation and fine. Refuse to comply and it escalates." Sarah's voice trembled, but she stood tall. "You're trespassing. Leave now." I locked eyes with them. My voice dropped an octave, steady as a hammer on steel. "You heard her. Leave, or I'll make sure you leave." They tried to posture to puff up bigger. But the truth was already written on their faces: doubt, fear, the knowledge they'd stepped into something way over their heads, and still they stayed. That night, after they finally retreated with empty threats and staged authority, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't drink. She looked at me with those eyes that said, "What's happening to our home?" I squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, they just declared war. And if there's one thing I knew better than anyone else in that entire neighborhood, it's how to fight a war. There's a saying we had in the teams: don't fire until you know where every shadow hides." I lived by that rule overseas, and I wasn't about to forget it now, especially not when the battlefield was my own front yard and the enemy wore sunglasses and fake badges. The night after those clowns shoved Sarah, I sat in the dark living room replaying footage from our Ring camera. Sarah was upstairs, finally asleep after 2 cups of chamomile and a whispered promise from me that I wouldn't let anyone touch her again, but sleep didn't come for me. Not with adrenaline still pumping, and not with the memory of their smug faces burned into my mind. I replayed the footage frame by frame, the SUV with no plates, the decals that looked like they'd been printed at a strip mall copy center, Todd the bulky one pushing Sarah, Mason his skinny sidekick laughing like a hyena. Every detail mattered. I cataloged it all. By 2 in the morning, I had files, sorted screenshots printed, and timestamps noted. Years of intel work turned suburban surveillance into an operation log. And I wasn't the only one watching. The next morning, Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door, phone in hand. She'd filmed the whole thing from her porch. The woman might have been pushing 70, but her camera work was steadier than some military recon I'd seen. She handed me the video without hesitation. "Men like that," she said in her thick accent, "they think fear is a weapon. You show them different." Tyler came over next. He was barely 20, a tech nerd. With a drone he flew like it was an extension of his arm. His footage showed the SUV from above, circling the block before pulling up to my house. And best of all, the angle caught Karen's silver Lexus parked half-hidden 2 houses away. She was there, watching, directing. "Bro," Tyler muttered, shaking his head. "They're not even trying to hide it." "Exactly," I said. "That's their mistake." Now, one thing SEAL training drilled into us was that strength isn't just in your fists. It's in intel, in patience, in letting your enemy think they're in control right up until you turn the tables. So I didn't storm over to Karen's house or hunt down Todd and Mason. I started a quiet operation right here in Willow Creek. First step, documentation. I had Sarah set up our indoor cams to face windows covering front and back yards. I adjusted the Ring sensitivity to trigger at the smallest movement. Tyler helped me patch everything to cloud storage. If they tried to erase or tamper, I'd still have backups. Second step, information. I dug into HOA newsletters, minutes from board meetings, and contractor budgets. I found a line item labeled Enhanced Community Security Services buried under landscaping expenses. My gut told me that was the money trail. Third step, psychological warfare. Nothing illegal, just enough to rattle them. When Karen strutted down the block the following afternoon, clipboard clutched like a weapon, I was outside trimming hedges with my shears. I looked up, met her gaze, and smiled. Not friendly. The kind of smile that says, "I know more than you think." She turned away quickly, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. Message received. Still, gathering evidence wasn't enough. I needed to test these imposters to see how far they'd go. So when Todd and Mason cruised by again 2 nights later, same SUV, same fake swagger, I didn't confront them. I walked down my driveway slowly, phone in hand, and asked one simple question. Badge numbers. They froze. Todd muttered something incoherent. Mason glanced at the SUV like the answer might be taped to the dashboard. I repeated myself louder. Badge numbers, department, precinct. Their silence was damning. Mrs. Alvarez's porch light flicked on across the street. Tyler's drone buzzed faintly overhead. The imposters shifted, muttered excuses, and left. Exactly what I wanted. More proof they were nothing but hired muscle. Sarah asked me that night why I didn't just call the real police immediately. I squeezed her hand and told her the truth. Because when I call them, I want every piece of evidence lined up so tight that not even Karen's lawyer can wiggle her out of it. What Sarah didn't see was the other side of me, the side that itched, to end this with my fists fast and brutal. I'd been trained to eliminate threats, not negotiate with them. But I'd also been trained in restraint, in the value of letting the enemy expose themselves. And these guys were exposing plenty. Over the next week, I collected more. Screenshots of HOA emails signed by Karen and Ron, authorizing additional patrols. Copies of invoices for the security company suspiciously inflated. And then the smoking gun, a whistleblower text from a neighbor who worked at City Hall. The security company had no license. It had been dissolved 2 years ago. Which meant every dollar the HOA paid them was a dollar funneled into a ghost operation. I started piecing together the puzzle. Karen wasn't just on a power trip. She and Ron were likely lining their pockets, hiding kickbacks under the guise of neighborhood safety. And when I pushed back at meetings when Sarah stood tall against their nonsense, they didn't just want compliance, they wanted to crush us to make an example. What they didn't understand was that they hadn't picked a meek neighbor. They'd picked a man who had spent decades in hostile territory learning how to dismantle corruption from the inside out. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by files, Sarah touched my arm. "Jack," she whispered. "What are you going to do?" I looked at her steady. "What I've always done. Gather intel, plan the op and strike when they least expect it." I leaned back, staring at the stacks of evidence. They think they've boxed us in, but all they've really done is walk into my kill zone. Sarah shivered, but she nodded. She knew me well enough to understand. The imposters thought shoving my wife was the endgame. Karen thought she'd broken us. What none of them realized was that I'd only just begun. The deeper I dug, the uglier it became. What started as petty harassment over hedges and parked cars had rotted into something far darker. It wasn't just Karen being power drunk, it was a machine, and she was greasing its gears with arrogance and greed. By now, I had a war chest of evidence. Videos from Mrs. Alvarez, drone footage from Tyler, Sarah's testimony, my own recordings. But evidence without context is just noise. I needed the big picture, the map of how this whole racket fit together. That's when I found the paper trail. The HOA website, poorly maintained, ironically enough, kept PDFs of meeting minutes and budgets. Buried under line items for landscaping, mulch, and pool maintenance was one that made my jaw clench: enhanced community security services. A tidy $75,000 allocated annually. No explanation, no vendor, listed just services. I cross-referenced that with invoices Tyler pulled from a neighbor who'd accidentally received an HOA email chain. The invoices were billed to a company called Patriot Community Defense, LLC. Except Patriot had been dissolved in the state registry 2 years ago. Their office address was nothing but a strip mall mailbox. In other words, money was leaving Willow Creek, but no legitimate company was cashing the checks. Which begged the question, who was Sarah? Sat beside me at the dining table, flipping through highlighted documents. So Karen and Ron are, what, just funneling dues into their own pockets? Looks that way, I said. They ghost-wrote a company, funneled HOA funds, and hired 2 idiots to play cop and keep people scared. Classic shell game. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. And no one else notices. They notice, I replied. They're just too intimidated or too exhausted to fight. That's when I realized Karen's true weapon wasn't her clipboard or her fake security muscle. It was fatigue. She wore people down one violation notice at a time until resistance felt pointless. But she made one mistake. She came after my wife. And I don't fatigue. The final piece came from a FOIA request I'd filed with the local police department. I asked for all dispatch records to Willow Creek on the day of Sarah's so-called violation. The response landed in my inbox at 2:00 a.m. Clear as crystal, no unit dispatched, no call logged, no officers sent. Which meant the men who shoved Sarah weren't just acting out of line, they were impersonating law enforcement. That was my trigger point. Evidence secured, witnesses aligned, motive uncovered. Now it was time for Phase 2 exposure. I started with Detective Lon Wynn. A straight arrow type, sharp-eyed and skeptical, the kind of cop you actually want in your corner. I arranged a quiet meeting at a diner 3 towns over. Laid out the videos, invoices, and dissolved business registry. Nguyen listened, barely touched his coffee, and finally said, "You know what you've got here, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and assault on top of it." "Sounds about right," I said. Nguyen leaned in. "But you also know people like Karen don't fold easy. If you push too soon, she'll bury or shred everything before I can move." "I know," I replied. "That's why we won't push too soon. We'll let her feel untouchable a little longer. Then we cut her legs out in public. Because here's the thing about bullies, they thrive in whispers, in backroom deals, in secret fines slipped under doors. But bullies crumble under light. And what better spotlight than the next HOA meeting where Karen strutted like royalty in front of her subjects? In the days leading up, I prepped like it was a mission. Tyler printed stills from his drone. Mrs. Alvarez rehearsed her testimony. Sarah, trembling at first, found her voice again because righteous anger is fuel, and she had plenty of it now. Meanwhile, I baited the enemy. I deliberately parked a guest car half an inch over the HOA's imaginary line. Within 30 minutes, Karen was at my door, smug and venomous. "Another violation, Jack. You really don't learn." I smiled at her. "Oh, I learn, Karen. I just learned different lessons than you think." The look on her face, half confusion, half suspicion, told me I'd rattled her. Perfect. She'd walk into that meeting confident, unprepared for what was coming. The night arrived. Folding chairs filled the community center. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, clutching their dues, invoices weary from years of nickel and dime harassment. Ron cleared his throat at the podium, trying to look statesmanlike. Karen hovered beside him, lips pursed, clipboard clutched like a scepter. I took my seat in the second row, Sarah beside me, evidence folder resting on my lap, like a weapon ready to be drawn. Ron started droning about landscaping improvements. Karen interrupted, raising her voice about continued violations and certain residents undermining community order. Her gaze swept to me. She wanted a confrontation. She wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. She had no idea she was walking into her own ambush. Because tonight I wasn't just a neighbor defending his wife. Tonight I was the man who'd spent years dismantling corruption overseas. And tonight Karen and her cronies were about to learn that in my world the shadows never stay hidden for long. The community center smelled like stale coffee and cheap disinfectant, but that night it might as well have been an arena. Folding chairs stretched wall-to-wall, neighbors filling every seat. Some were curious, some tired, some silently praying Karen wouldn't single them out. For years people had endured her reign of citations and fines, heads bowed to avoid her gaze. But tonight, I could feel something different in the air, a current humming just beneath the surface. Ron Dalrymple, HOA president, tapped the microphone like a politician rehearsing his victory speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Tonight's agenda..." He barely got 3 words out before Karen hijacked the stage. Clipboard in hand, she marched to the front, heels clacking like gunfire. "Before we waste time on landscaping," she declared, "we must address repeated violations by certain homeowners. Disrespect for our bylaws cannot go unchecked." Her eyes locked on me like a predator sighting prey. A hush spread through the room. I stood slowly, folder tucked under my arm. Sarah's hand brushed mine for courage. "Mrs. Alvarez gave me a sharp nod from the back row. Tyler's drone camera, hidden inside his backpack, quietly whirred to life, capturing every angle. Karen smirked. "Mr. Mercer, perhaps you'd like to explain why you continue to flout our parking regulations, ignore maintenance guidelines, and threaten security personnel." I let the silence stretch. Years of SEAL briefings had taught me the power of timing. Then, calm as stone, I said, "I'll be glad to explain. But first, let's clarify, which security personnel are you talking about? The ones from the dissolved company, or the ones impersonating law enforcement when they shoved my wife?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile twitched. "Ridiculous," she snapped. "Those men were authorized contractors." "Authorized by whom?" I countered, pulling out the first set of documents. "Because according to the state registry, Patriot Community Defense doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for 2 years. Yet somehow this HOA has been cutting them checks signed by you and Mr. Dalrymple." I slapped the copies of invoices onto the folding table at the front. Neighbors craned their necks, murmurs swelling into a buzz. Ron cleared his throat nervously. "Let's not sensationalize," but I wasn't finished. "Here's video evidence," I said, holding up my phone. Tyler's drone footage lit the projection screen Tyler had quietly synced. The SUV with no plates. The fake patches. The moment Todd shoved Sarah, the crowd reacted instantly, mothers clutching their arms, fathers muttering curses, eyes narrowing in anger. Karen's veneer cracked. "This is taken out of context." That woman resisted lawful orders. That woman I interrupted, stepping closer as my wife. And there was nothing lawful about any of it. Mrs. Alvarez rose from her chair, voice steady as a judge's gavel. I saw it. I filmed it. They treated her like a criminal for nothing. Another neighbor chimed in. My son was threatened last month by those same men. Voices rose. Years of pent-up frustration poured out like water from a broken dam. Karen tried to shout over them, waving her clipboard like a shield, but the tide had turned. I raised my hand for quiet, and slowly, miraculously, the room hushed. I flipped open the final document, an email chain Tyler had dug up, projected now on the wall. Karen's messages to Ron detailing patrol schedules, violation quotas, and most damning of all, a note about ensuring funds are redirected as agreed. The words hung there in black and white. Ron paled. Karen sputtered. That's fabricated. Obviously fabricated. Detective Nguyen, who had slipped quietly into the back earlier, chose that moment to step forward. Badge flashing, voice crisp. Actually, Miss Whitfield, we've verified these emails. And we've also verified bank transfers tied to your personal account. The room erupted. Shouts. Gasps. Someone even clapped. Karen froze deer in headlights as Wynn's words sank in. Still, the imposters weren't gone. Todd and Mason, standing near the exit like hired muscle, puffed their chests. Todd snarled, "This is all lies. You think you can smear us, we'll shut this whole circus down." He started forward, hand balled into a fist. My instincts flared. Time slowed the way it always did when combat was imminent. I stepped into his path, voice cold steel. "Try it, please." For a moment it looked like he would. Mason egged him on with a sneer. But Todd's bravado faltered under my gaze. He hesitated just long enough for Wynn's backup officers, real ones this time, to surge forward, intercepting them. "Hands behind your back," one officer barked. The imposters resisted, struggling, but it was sloppy. Within seconds they were cuffed, their faces shoved against the community center wall. The neighbors broke into applause. Years of fear and resentment burst into cheers as the sham security was hauled out in disgrace. Karen tried one last desperate play, voice shrill. "This is a witch hunt. You people need me. Without me, this neighborhood falls apart." I looked around at the crowd, dozens of tired, angry, relieved faces, and then back at her. "No, Karen," I said. "Without you, this neighborhood finally has a chance to breathe." The silence that followed was deafening. Ron slumped in his chair, defeated. Karen's reign was over, and everyone knew it. But for me, this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because corruption that runs this deep always has another layer waiting to be peeled back. And I had a feeling the ugliest truth was still hiding in Karen's shadow. You'd think the HOA meeting would have been the end. Fraud exposed, fake cops, cuffed neighbors cheering like a crowd at a prize fight. But corruption rarely bows out gracefully. People like Karen don't accept defeat. They claw, they scheme, they lash out with every ounce of venom they have left. So, when the community center emptied that night, I wasn't surprised to see her silver Lexus idling near the curb. She didn't even look ashamed. She looked furious. Her lips pressed thin hands, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles glowed white. Ron was in the passenger seat, sweating bullets, whispering something to her. But Karen, she stared at me like a cornered animal plotting one last strike, and sure enough, she tried. The very next morning, Todd and Mason, the so-called security thugs, were back in the neighborhood, released on bail, still puffing their chests, strutting like they hadn't been dragged out in cuffs 12 hours earlier. That's when I knew Karen had doubled down. She was gambling everything on intimidation, hoping if she roared loud enough, people would forget the truth. But she forgot who she was dealing with. I was outside raking the yard when they approached, swaggering up the driveway. Todd sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero, Mercer. You humiliated us in front of everyone. That was a mistake." Mason chimed in, cracking his knuckles. "Real bad mistake." Behind me, Sarah stepped onto the porch, her face pale but her chin high. I could hear neighbors' blinds, shifting cameras clicking on. Willow Creek was watching. I dropped the rake and straightened, calm, controlled. My heartbeat slowed, that old SEAL rhythm kicking in combat breathing, focus sharpening like a blade. "You boys really want to do this?" I asked. Todd grinned, a nasty flash of teeth. "Damn right we do." He lunged first, sloppy and full of ego. I sidestepped, redirected his momentum, and drove my elbow into his ribs. The crack echoed off the houses. He folded with a grunt, staggering back. Mason came next, faster but wilder. He swung for my head. I ducked, caught his wrist, twisted hard, and drove him face first into the hood of his own SUV. The metal boomed. His sunglasses shattered, skittering across the pavement. Todd tried to recover, roaring, but I was already on him. One pivot, one strike, a palm heel to the chin, and his head snapped back. He crumpled, dazed, spitting curses. And here's the thing, I wasn't fighting to kill. I wasn't even fighting to injure. I was fighting to end it decisively, unmistakably so there'd be no more doubt in their minds. In Navy SEAL terms, I was neutralizing the threat. In neighbor terms, I was finally breaking their faces, shattering the masks they'd hidden behind. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalks gasped, then erupted into shouts. Phones recorded every second. Karen's Lexus screeched around the corner, braking hard. She jumped out heels, clicking voice, shrieking. Assault, you all saw it, he's a violent maniac. But this time her words didn't stick, because the neighbors had seen too much. They'd seen Sarah, shoved fines, fabricated money stolen, and now they'd seen her hired goons swing first. Detective Nguyen's cruiser pulled up, siren chirping once. He stepped out cool as ice hands on his belt. Funny, he said, surveying the scene, because from where I'm standing, it looks like self-defense. And about a dozen witnesses are going to back that up. Karen froze, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. Ron hung back, sweat soaking through his collar. Nguyen signaled to his officers. Take them in. Todd and Mason were hauled up, wrists cuffed again, groaning in defeat. Their swagger was gone. Their faces were swollen, bruised, broken, not by rage but by reality, finally catching up. Karen tried to backpedal, shouting about conspiracies and vendettas. But when Nguyen presented the financial records, those emails tying her directly to the fake security contracts, her fight sputtered out. She slumped against her Lexus shoulders, sagging, all the air leaking from her balloon of arrogance. Neighbors applauded. Some cried. One old man even saluted me, voice trembling as he said, "About damn time." Sarah slipped her hand into mine, squeezing tight. Her eyes shimmered not with fear but with relief. For the first time in months, she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. As the cruisers pulled away, Karen shouting from the back seat, I stood there on the curb, the neighborhood gathered around me. And I realized the battle wasn't just mine. Every person here had lived under her thumb, cowed by her threats. Tonight wasn't just about justice for Sarah, it was about freedom for all of Willow Creek. And as for me, I didn't need medals or thanks or applause. I'd done what I'd always done, faced the threat head on, dismantled it piece by piece, and left nothing standing but the truth. But there was still one more twist to come, one more layer of corruption waiting to be ripped away. Because while Karen sat cuffed, fuming in the back of that cruiser, her biggest secret hadn't been revealed yet. And when it came to light, even she wouldn't be able to deny the truth. For a brief moment it seemed finished. Karen cuffed, Ron cornered, Todd and Mason carted off like yesterday's garbage. Willow Creek was buzzing, neighbors trading stories on sidewalks like survivors after a storm. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks, without fear tugging at her lips. But experience told me one thing: loose ends always come back to strangle you if you don't tie them tight. And Karen Whitfield was a loose end wrapped in barbed wire. Detective Nguyen thought the same. We've got enough to bury her in fraud and impersonation charges, he told me. But I get the feeling there's more. You've seen her eyes, she's still hiding something. He wasn't wrong. Karen was prideful, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't risk everything on fake security and shell companies unless there was a bigger payoff. Something had to be missing. The answer arrived 2 days later in the most unexpected form, an email. Not to me, not to Win, but to the entire HOA mailing list. Sent accidentally by none other than Karen's son, Dylan. Subject line, kickback spreadsheet, mom's copy. I nearly spit my coffee when I opened it. Inside was a neat Excel sheet listing months' patrol payments and percentages labeled KW. It wasn't just fraud, it was a full-blown kickback scheme. Karen had been pocketing 10% off every fake security invoice, funneling HOA dues into her own personal vacation fund. The kicker, Dylan had meant to send it privately to his mother but hit reply all. The neighborhood lost its collective mind. Screenshots spread like wildfire. By the time Karen's lawyer scrambled to do damage control, it was too late. Even Ron couldn't shield her now. He resigned in disgrace within hours, mumbling something about betrayal of trust as neighbors booed him off his porch. The final showdown came in court. Sarah and I sat side by side, Miss Alvarez behind us like a proud grandmother, Tyler, with his drone footage queued up. The judge listened stone-faced as Wynn laid out the fraud, the impersonation, the assault, and finally the spreadsheet, the nail in Karen's coffin. Karen tried to spin it, of course. She claimed it was taken out of context, that the payments were consulting fees, that Dylan had mislabeled columns. But Dylan himself, squirming under oath, admitted it all. She told me to keep track of the cuts, he muttered, eyes down. The courtroom erupted. Karen's face drained of color. When the gavel finally came down, sentencing her to prison time and restitution, the room broke into applause. Willow Creek wasn't just free of her, it was reborn. Afterward, neighbors threw a block party. Kids rode bikes again without fear of being ticketed. People decorated their yards with flamingos, wind chimes, even a 12-foot skeleton someone hauled out of storage just to celebrate the death of HOA tyranny. Sarah laughed until her cheeks hurt, and for the first time our house felt like a home instead of a bunker. As for me, I didn't celebrate much. Victory is never sweet when it comes at the cost of bruised neighbors and broken trust. But I stood tall knowing one thing: we had fought back and we had won. And in the end, that's what mattered. Because when Karen called fake cops on my wife, when her goons shoved Sarah, she thought fear would silence us. But fear doesn't work on a man who's faced worse than Karen Whitfield in deserts half a world away. Fear doesn't work on a Navy SEAL. And when I said I broke their faces, I didn't just mean Todd and Mason. I meant every mask Karen and her cronies wore: authority, intimidation, respectability, shattered, exposed, gone. Now Willow Creek was free, and my wife, she had the peace she deserved. Looking back, this wasn't just a fight with an overzealous HOA board. It was a reminder that bullies come in many forms. Some wear uniforms, some hold clipboards, some hide behind bylaws. But all of them thrive on silence. They count on good people keeping their heads down, telling themselves it's not worth the trouble. But it is worth it. Because silence only feeds the beast. The truth is, courage doesn't always mean charging into gunfire. Sometimes it means standing up in a community meeting with a folder of evidence. Sometimes it means filming on your porch when everyone else hides behind their curtains. Sometimes it means holding your wife's hand, promising her she won't face the storm alone. This fight taught me that justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoring balance. Karen thought she owned Willow Creek, but she forgot what makes a neighborhood strong. Not rules, not fines, not fear, but people. Honest, decent people willing to stand together. So here's my lesson to you: never underestimate the power of speaking up. Even if your voice shakes, even if the odds feel stacked. Because the moment you refuse to be silent, the mask slips and the bully's power crumbles. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA nightmares to uncover.